Okay, in this lecture I'll deal with the fundamentals of manufacturing and mechanical or physical properties of materials. So these fundamentals is necessary to understand some of the future lectures. So here we need to recall that engineering materials can be classified into three primary classes, that is, one is metals and alloys, second one is the ceramics and glasses, and third one is the polymers. And then fourth one, that is the composites, which I call them derived material class, because composites are essentially mixture of two of the three primary material classes, that is metals and ceramics, or ceramics are polymers and polymers are metals, and accordingly they are termed as MMC, CMC and PMC. Under each category of the primary materials like metals, ceramics and glasses, I have given some examples. Like steel is primarily used as biomaterials in India, in the Indian scenario, because steel is relatively less expensive, where the titanium alloys, like which is used as the stem of the total heap replacement, which is rather costly because titanium itself is quite costly compared to steel. Now among the ceramics and glasses, so zirconia and alumina, they are two competing materials which are potentially used in the femoral ball head applications. Polyethylene is also used as the acetabular cup in the total hip replacement. So these are the examples of the biomaterials from different primary material classes that are currently being used. Now some idea about the manufacturing processes, like how these materials are manufactured. Mostly in this slide I will show you that typical manufacturing routes which are employed for the manufacturing of metals and ceramics. Now first let us go through the metals, how it is done. So you start with the molten metal, then this molten metal can be cast into a particular ingot in a particular shape, and subsequently this ingot can be rolled to make it a plate, and this plate can be directly used, like in the plates like used in that different biomedical applications. It can be machined as required, and finally its finishing and going to the products as the biomaterial products. Now there is other way of making this same plate, that is the continuous casting or continuous rolling route. So continuous casting means this molten metal will be poured into a again and mold, and it is being continuously cast through the continuous caster machine, and then depending on the thickness of the rolled product that you want, so this continuous cast product can be subsequently rolled to make it as desired thickness as possible, and subsequently they can be go to the finishing stage and assembly stage. Now same ingot can be cast, can be extruded to make a rod, like various biomedical applications you require product of different shape and different sizes. For example, it can be used as plates, it can be used as rods, it can be used as screws. So depending on the end application or end product that you want, you can particularly use or you can adopt a particular sequence of applications, sequence of processes during the manufacturing of these materials. Now the other way is that powders. So powders are typically used for ceramics or polymer based materials. So these powder based manufacturing routes are essentially applicable for ceramics, and mostly ceramics or polymer based materials. Now you start with the fine powders, then you can press it a particular shape which is called green body. Now this green body you can subsequently fire or sinter to make a particular product, and in this process you can either get a very simple shaped product like cylindrical size product, or you can get a complex shaped product, and for that complex shaped product during the pressing itself you can use the SIP, what is called cold isostatic pressing. Now various polymeric based materials, you start with the powders, then you can do injection molding or extrusion, and subsequently you can fire it to remove the binder from this polymeric product, and then it can go through the finishing stage and finally product stage. So this particular route, as I said, is particularly useful for ceramics or polymers, and these particular routes like molten metals, these are particularly useful for metals and alloys. Okay. So more specific description of individual routes will be given when I will discuss individual class of biomaterials like biometallic alloys or bioceramics or biopolymers. Now before going through further, let us first understand that that how typically microstructure looks like, because this course of biomaterials is equally relevant from people or for students from different disciplines. Therefore a primary understanding of how this microstructure looks like, that is important, and how to characterize the microstructure. Now this is the typical microstructure that one can observe for typical polycrystalline materials. Now in this microstructure, what you can see that there are individual area which is demarcated from other area by some boundary. Now this boundary is called grain boundary, and the area enclosed, microstructural region enclosed by the grain boundary, this is called grain. Now left hand side image actually tells you that inside the grain, so this is your grain boundary, the way I am sketching it here, and this is inside, this is your part of a grain. So in each grain the lattice planes are there, and along this lattice planes atoms are arranged in particular orientation. Grain A to grain B, you see that orientation of the atoms also subsequently changes. Now when you go from grain B to grain C, again across the grain boundary your orientation of the atoms are also changing. Essentially what it means, that grain boundary is the area where the orientation of the atomic planes changes from a particular orientation to a completely different orientation. So this is the area, grain boundary is the area of the higher disordered region. So this brief understanding is required, because later on I will mention about the grains and grain boundaries very often to describe the microstructure of different materials. Now second important thing is this microstructure, to understand that this particular scale bar is around 100 micron. So from this scale bar one can understand what is the typical size of these grains, and this typical size, if you take a particular diameter of this grain, so it will be roughly 1.5 times this scale bar, so it will be likely 150 micron. However, we should also notice here that this grain size is not a fixed value. There is a variation of this grain size across this microstructure. So there is a term called grain size distribution is often used to characterize the microstructure, or in other words, you can say roughly from the visual look of this microstructure that grain size here typically varies between 50 to 150 micron. And if you say that, then you will be completing the description of this kind of microstructure. So this is in general brief that how the microstructure looks like and how one can characterize this microstructure in scientific terms. Now in the next few slides I will go through quickly about the concept of engineering stress and engineering strain. So these particular set of slides which I will be showing you next several minutes, that are essential to understand the typical mechanical behavior or mechanical properties of materials. Now first one will be the concept of engineering stress, engineering strain, and how this true strain concept is essential and true stress concept is also required. Now what are the description of the strength parameters, now how the strength property and load bearing capability of materials can be described, how to quantify ductility, and what is the concept of toughness. So all these concepts will be discussed one by one. So first let us start with the description of typical stress and strain. So left hand side what you can see, this is a cylindrical specimen, and this cylindrical specimen is pulled in tension. So this is the simplistic description of how a tensile force is applied to a cylindrical specimen, and as a result this cylinder will increase its length and decrease in the cross section, and increase in length will be incommensurate with the decrease in cross section up to a certain point during tension test. Now those details I will describe little later. Now let us look at the middle slide. Here a cylindrical specimen is being compressed by a force F, and as a result it keeps on decreasing in height and keeps on increasing in the diameter. Again this is the most simplistic description of the compression force. Now third one is that shear stress. This dotted lines is the original position of a cube, for example, and in this two opposite face if you apply equal amount of force, which force amount is F, then after you apply this force on the two opposite faces, these bold lines essentially indicates the new state after the application of the stress. What you can see that there is a kind of angular distortion of some faces by the angle theta, and this is a typical description of the shear strain. And here again surface area of the top face and bottom face remains same. So from this slide it is clear to you there are essentially three types of stresses. This is again three primary types of stresses. One is called tension, one is called compression, and one is called shear, and each type of force they apply in a characteristically different manner, and that has a typically 3 different type of effect on a material shape or material size. Now this shows that if a typical metallic materials, if you do the tests at a particular temperature and if you do a test at a cryogenic level, how these two behavior can be different. Now this one is a typical ductile behavior. Why I am saying typical ductile behavior? So this is the two parts of a long cylinder which is being pulled in tension, and what you see here, you look at this area and you look at this area. In these two areas, prior to fracture, the material has experienced extensive deformation, because you can see this diameter of the cylindrical specimen here that shows extensive contraction prior to fracture, and this is called in metallurgical language called cup and cone type of fracture. Now if you look at this particular fracture behavior, that there is no such contraction in the diameter prior to fracture, and this kind of fracture is known as brittle fracture. Now this brittle fracture is typically noticed for a metals below the DBT. DBT means ductile to brittle transition temperature. If you test any metal below the ductile to brittle transition temperature, this metal will behave more like a brittle material. Similar observation are often found while testing most of the ceramics, because ceramics are essentially brittle, as I have explained in the last lecture. So essentially from this view graph you can clearly distinguish between ductile and brittle fracture. In case of the ductile fracture, you have large deformation prior to fracture. In case of brittle fracture, the material simply is broken to two pieces without experiencing or without undergoing much deformation prior to fracture. Now why mechanical properties are important? They determine a material's behavior when subjected to a mechanical stresses, and these properties include elastic modulus, ductility and hardness, and various measures of strength. Now therefore this mechanical property determination or mechanical testing is important. Now mechanical properties desirable to designer, that is who design different materials, is high strength, and usually make manufacturing more difficult, because if you take a very high strength material, then to process the material to a particular shape becomes more and more difficult, because you require very large capacity rolling press or forging press to deform that material, because the material itself has very high strength. So whatever desirable to a designer many times makes difficult for a mechanical engineer or material scientist to process that material, because manufacturing becomes more difficult for high strength materials. So this point is important, because these are like some of the finer details what a student or researcher should understand or should take a note of it. Okay, this is just a brief description what I have just mentioned a few minutes ago. Tensile essentially means tend to stretch the material, compressive means tend to squeeze it. So that is like simplistic description. Shear means tend to cause adjacent portions of materials to slide against each other. So these are like three different types of static stresses which materials experience. Now in few slides more I will be describing the stress strain curve, and these stress strain curve essentially describe the basic mechanical properties for all the three different types of stresses that I have mentioned in the above. Now first understand the what is called by engineering stress. Engineering stress simply means the force divided by initial or original area of the test specimen. So this is the original cross sectional area, so initial cross sectional area of the test specimens, and this is a simplistic description or definition of the engineering stress. Similarly, engineering strain means that is the length at any point during elongation minus the original length or initial length divided by the initial length. So that is the what is the length increment divided by the initial length, that is defined as the engineering strain. Now this is a typical stress strain curve of a ductile metal, and what you see in this typical stress strain curve, that initially you have the elastic region, and in this elastic region this is the stress, that is the sigma E is the engineering stress and E is the engineering strain. So in this region sigma E is proportional to small e, and this proportionality constant known as the elastic modulus. Okay. So, from the slope of this curve you can get essentially elastic modulus of a metal. Okay. So, essentially what it means? It means suppose you start with a point 0, you go to a point A for example. Now, if from this A, if you load it to the point A and if you release the load at the point A, then it will come back to the original position. So, this is the meaning of the elasticity. Elasticity means it's just like a elastic rubber or something. You stretch it, the moment you release the stress, it comes back to the original position. The same thing happens to a metal also, like you up to this particular point Y, at any point if you load it and if you unload it, the metal comes back to the original position. And in this region, sigma E is equal to E times small e, that is the modulus of elasticity. So, this is known as modulus of elasticity or elastic modulus. Okay. Now, the major thing that happens when a metal undergoes from elastic region to plastic region, and in this plastic region what we call is a non-linear behavior. So, this region is called linear behavior and this region is called non-linear behavior. And this non-linear behavior, what you see here, that this is called the plastic region. Why this is called plastic region? Because here if you go to, for example, a point B and if you unload it, the material will come back like this. It will not follow the original path of loading. So, it will come back, the unloading will take place in a completely different path. And in this region, if you want to find out that what is the elastic strain and what is the plastic strain, suppose this is your total strain epsilon T or Et. Now, Et is equal to E, that is that simple E, that is the elastic strain, and Ep, that is the plastic strain. And how to find out that what is the plastic strain? Because this, when you unload it, it comes back to, for example, the point C, and this is your point D. So, that elastic strain E is nothing but OC and plastic strain is nothing but CD. So, that is the total strain that a material would experience in the plastic region. Now, here from this view graph you can understand that what happens to a cylindrical specimen when it is being pulled in tension. Now, when it is being pulled in tension, here at this non-elastic non-linear behavior or plastic regime, what you see, this material will keep on extending in length first, but beyond this point M, what is called as that UTS, that is the ultimate tensile strength region, that decrease in the cross sectional area is faster than the increase in the length. I repeat, beyond the ultimate tensile strength or up to the point of fracture, decrease in the cross sectional area is much faster than the increase in length. That means that the material will contract at this cross sectional area faster than the length increment that the material will experience. And as a result, what will happen up to a point F, this material will not be able to bear the load any further, and it will cause the total fracture of the material. So, this region actually known as the necking region, and necking means this is like a non-uniform plasticity. And this region to this region is called uniform plastic behavior. Okay. Now, you know that how you can characterize the entire stress strain curve. You have the elastic part up to this point, then your non-uniform or then the non-linear elasticity, non-linear plasticity behavior starts, and in this non-linear plasticity up to the point M, then your necking starts, the material goes to fracture, and in this region of non-linear behavior, one can roughly write that sigma is equal to K epsilon to the power n, but where sigma and epsilon are the true stress and true strain values of the material. So, I will come back to this true stress, true strain concept now. So, this thing I have already mentioned, that is the modulus of elasticity. Now, yield point Y, that can be identified by the change in the slope at the upper end of the linear region. So that one also you have seen that how to identify the yield strength of a material. So TS or final ultimate tensile strength, what I have said that UTS is nothing but total F max divided by A naught. Now if you go back to this slide, so how to find out this ultimate tensile strength? So what is the load here? So this is the load, suppose this is the load F max and your original area of cross section is A naught. So from that you can find out that what is the ultimate tensile strength of this material. Now ductility. Ductility is that ability of a material to be deformed plastically without fracture. So that means elongation up to the point of necking is taken as a measure of ductility from the perspective of metal working processes. Now if you go back to this particular slide, now you would be able to reconcile very clearly that what is meant by ductility. What is the definition? It says that this region, what is the total strain up to the point of necking. So this is your point of necking here. So this is the start of the necking. So that means up to this point the total strain that the material can experience, that is called as a ductility property of a material. And typically fracture toughness or toughness is the total area under the stress strain curve. So this total area of under the stress strain curve, that is defined as the toughness of the material. So there are two terms here, one is the toughness and one is the resilience. Now resilience is the area under the curve up to the elastic part, and toughness is the area of the curve up to the total area of the curve up to the plastic part. Now coming to the concept of this true stress true strain curve, now what you have seen here, that in the engineering stress strain curve, that is essentially based on the initial original cross sectional area. But true stress true strain curve is actually based on the instantaneous cross sectional area, and this instantaneous cross sectional area, if you look at, this is the dotted line here, this is the true stress true strain curve, and this projected curve if necking had not occurred, and this is the start of the necking. Now if previous engineering curve were plotted in the true stress true strain curve, then it will give it like this. And again you have this elastic region, you have the non-linear behavior which is called plasticity, and then it goes to fracture of the material. Now how you define the true stress? True stress is again essentially force by instantaneous cross sectional area. Instantaneous means at any given point of time what is the cross sectional area of the metal specimen, that is known as the true stress of the material. And what is called true strain? True strain is again that it is a very standard formula, that is true strain is nothing but ln L by L naught. And what is L? This L is again the instantaneous length of the specimen. So L is the instantaneous length of the specimen, and L naught is the original length of the specimen. So the log natural of the ratio of the instantaneous length to the original length, that can be defined as the true strain, and because it provides a more realistic assessment of the instantaneous elongation, that is the reason why true strain is typically used. So I go back to the true stress. True stress is again the ratio of the force divided by the instantaneous cross sectional area, that is known as the true stress. Now flow curve. Now if you look at this uniform elongation up to the point of necking, as I said, there the true stress and true strain, they follow sigma is equal to k epsilon to the power n, this kind of relationship. Now what is n? N is typically strain hardening coefficient, and typically it is around 0.1 to 0.5. So this is the value of n that typically it has. K is the strength coefficient, epsilon is the true strain, sigma is the true stress. Now coming to the compression test. Now compression test, as I mentioned earlier, that it essentially means that you are actually squeezing with the application of some force from the both the ends, and equal amount of force is applied from both the ends. Okay, and this is the initial state of the sample. This is the final state of the sample. What you see that its cross sectional area increases, so that increases to A, from A naught to A, and their H naught actually decreases to H, and that is as a result of the compression test. and here engineering strain is defined as follows, that is the height decrement divided by the original height. So that is h minus h naught. So h is the initial final height, h naught is the original height by h naught. That is how engineering strain is defined. Now how this engineering stress strain curve that looks like during the compression test. Now this looks like initially it goes to the linear region. So up to this point the material is linear. Now from this point onwards it goes to the non-linear behavior and goes to fracture, and this is the non-linear part, and here what you can see that it is largely different from what you have seen in case of the metals. So for compression behavior it goes to the non-linear, it is true, but it keeps on increasing in a non-linear fashion and then it goes to the fracture region. In case of the tensile test it goes through this kind of behavior, then it goes to fracture. So this is for tension T and this is for compression C. You can clearly see for the same metal it behaves differently when it is pressed, when it is stretched in tension compared to when it is squeezed in compression. Now shear properties, this is the application of stresses in opposite directions on either side of a thin element. So essentially these shear properties each causes the angular distortion of the two opposite surfaces, and here again the tau is defined as the equal amount of force that you are applying to the cross sectional area, and shear strain actually is this the distance between the two planes, that is B to the ratio of the delta, and this B over delta is defined as the shear strain of a material. Now how this shear stress shear strain curve looks like for a ductile metal. Now like tension and compression, your shear stress shear strain curve also will show initially linear part, that means initial response of the shear stress or initial response of a material to a shear stress, to the application of a shear stress, will follow a linear part. That means if you release it the material comes back to 0, then it is followed by non-linear fashion, then it goes to fracture of the material, and this fracture of the material that takes place reasonably at higher shear stress region, and that is defined as the shear strength. In the linear region tau is equal to G gamma is actually valid, and tau is equal to G gamma means tau is proportional to gamma. In other words, shear stress is proportional to shear strain, and constant of proportionality is known as the shear modulus G, and this G is typically 70 to 80 gigapascal for most of the metals, and again it is a shear yield point like the way you have seen for the tension test. Now on the same plot, if I summarize that how the tension, compression and shear will be different, or the response of a material to a tension force, tensile force or compressive force or shear force will be different. I would like to summarize it so that you can understand these three things in a same plot. So this is, let's say, for tension, this one is for shear, that is S, and this one is for compression, that is C. What you see in the compressive strength typically is typically higher than tension or equal to tension, but in compression that material undergoes more and more, material has the capability to take more and more load. In the shear stress again it goes to a non-linear manner, but in the tension case it goes through necking, and this necking does not occur in case of shear and compression. That is why tension force you have a completely different type of behavior compared to that of compression. As I said, tau is equal to G gamma, that is up to the shear limit, so that is up to the yield limit. This is the up to the yield limit, the tau is equal to G gamma, and G is the shear modulus, and for most metals G is equal to 0.4 E, where E is the elastic modulus. So shear stress at the fracture is kind of shear is called shear strength, and shear strength is roughly 0.7 TS. So these kind of relationships are valid for the wide range of materials, like that if you know the elastic modulus of a material, for example, to give an example, elastic modulus of steel, that is 210 gigapascal. Now this is elastic modulus of steel E value, so therefore G value would be roughly around 84 gigapascal. So this 84 gigapascal is essentially calculated that G is equal to 0.4 E. Now tensile strength of a typical steel material. Now if the tensile strength is around 500 megapascal, so these kind of values are important for you to understand that what is the strength value of these materials. Now if it is 500 MPa, then the shear strength value would be roughly around 350 MPa. That means in case of the, when you apply the shear stress to a typical stainless steel, then it can bear up to the 350 MPa of the shear stress, and tensile strength is around 500 MPa. And here the slope value, when you draw the tensile stress strain curve, their slope will be much steeper compared to that of the shear stress. Now if you plot it here, this is the tensile stress strain curve. So if this is the tensile stress strain curve, then your shear stress strain curve would be little bit more flat, and then it will be like this, because this is your shear, because this slope will be the tension slope will be much steeper compared to the shear stress, and that is the reason that they are sequentially that will be at the lower level than compared to the tensile stress strain curve. Now coming back to the example of the sum of the metals. Now metals, this is the processing of fabrication is reproducible, because typically metals, the typical fabrication route would be casting and then rolling and then finishing products. Casting, rolling or forging or other type of metal forming processes, what in general or generic name of these processes are the metal forming processes, and then you can go to the final product. And then final product, it can be either in the form of a plate, in the form of a sheet, or in the form of a rod, and depending on that you can adopt a sequence of processes which are particularly applicable. So this is production fabrication is reproducible, and they are rather inexpensive. Metals are stiff and strong, as I said, that typically it has a tensile strength of around 500 MPa. Now joining technologies are all known. Joining technologies means, suppose you want to make a complicated part of a bimetallic part, then you want to join the two parts. For example, this is one part and this is another part. Now typically this welding process is also quite standard or quite known, and these welding processes or joining processes can be easily adapted for a particular application. Now most metals which are most commonly used for this kind of biomedical applications, they are like titanium based alloys, tantalum, 316 stainless steel, cobalt chromium alloys, nitinol. Now if you recall yesterday's lecture, I have told that nitinol is a safe memory alloy. Cobalt chrome alloys, they can be used as the knee joint, or stainless steel, these are used mostly as the plates or screws. Now titanium based alloys, they can be used as the stem of the artificial hip, that is the total hip replacement part. So these are like standard use of these different metallic materials. Now these are like this slide particularly tells you that what are the different type of products that are possible when you use the metals. Now you can see, because metals are essentially ductile and they are deformable, you can make the holes of different sizes on this typical metallic part. This is a typical metallic plate, and this typical metallic plate you have this kind of holes here, and these holes you can make it by a standard technique, and these plates with these holes in these metallic plates you can put it for a particular biomedical applications. Similarly, you can see here this is like typical screws of the metals and stainless steel metals that you can use. You can use as a femoral head also, like steel ball also can be used as a femoral head, but typically ceramic balls are preferred. Why? Because ceramic balls has a longer durability. And these are like acetabular cup. This is the total femoral stem, which is typically made of either stainless steel SS or titanium. If the patient can bear costly hip, then they can go for titanium because it has a better corrosion resistance and better strength properties. If the patient wants very cheap, then it can go for he or she can go for the stainless steel femoral stem. So this particular slide shows that the different components of a total hip replacement and total knee replacement. So in case of total hip, you can see that there are three components here. One is the stem, the second one is the femoral ball head, and third one is the acetabular cup. Now these three components are mechanically integrated into this particular compact area here, and this total stem is also surrounded by the natural tissues and bones. However, there is an intimate mechanical contact here where this femoral ball is in direct contact with acetabular cup, and these are like at the articulating contact. Now this articulating contact essentially indicates that here that this femoral ball will experience, is bound to experience the friction and wear while in contact with acetabular cup, which is made of the polymeric material. This particular area is called knee joint, and in this knee joint applications, what you can see again, it is a load bearing kind of part, and this load bearing part can be either made of the cobalt, chromium, moly alloy, or it can be made of some polymeric materials like polyether ether ketone, like high load bearing materials, and their composites. So essentially in both these total hip and total knee replacement, these are essentially examples of the load bearing implant. Here, like in addition to biocompatibility, mechanical properties are equally important in both the case of total hip and total knee replacement. These are the examples of the commercial total hip replacement components. What you can see that this stem part, now this stem part can be coated or this can be uncoated also. Now this is the examples of the hydroxyapatite coated titanium femoral stem, or this can be coated on the stainless steel substrate also. Now why hydroxyapatite coating is required on this titanium stem? Because the hydroxyapatite, as I have mentioned in the first lecture, it is essentially highly biocompatible and bioactive materials. So when you put this hydroxyapatite coating here, then it will enhance the osseointegration or good biocompatibility, in vitro and in vivo biocompatibility of this material. Now these are the examples of the acetabular cup, which is typically used in this total hip replacement, and this cup actually has this cup can house this kind of femoral ball. So this can be directly fitted inside this acetabular cup during these total hip replacement operations. So now this cup can be made of metallic, this cup can be made of the polymeric parts also. Now this is like two different types of total hip replacement materials. One is the press fit and one is the cemented. Cemented means this cementing material here, it is used is that polymethyl methacrylate, that is PMMA, that is widely used as the bone cement materials. Now there are three combinations of the bearing couples in the total joint arthroplasty. So TJS stands for total joint arthroplasty, THR stands for total hip replacement, total hip joint replacement. Now in this total joint arthroplasty, what you can see here, this is the metallic ball and this is the polymeric cup. Okay. Now you can get this ceramic cup also, and you can get this ceramic ball also, and you can get this metallic ball as well as this can be metallic cup. So you can have this bearing couple metal on metal, it can have bearing couple metal on ceramic, you can have the bearing couple which is composed of metal and polymer. So therefore this is not something sacrosanct that you need to use the polymeric material all the time. For this acetabular cup, one can use this metal, one can use the ceramic also as the acetabular cup materials. This is exactly what I was trying to explain to you for last few minutes, that this is the kind of femoral ball and this is your acetabular cup here, and this acetabular cup here actually housing this femoral ball. So this is your ball, femoral ball, and this is your acetabular cup. Now these surface, two surfaces, they are completely in the reciprocating motion, and because of this reciprocating motion, this wear resistance is important at this surface. So both the friction and wear resistance are important at this surface, and this is your hydroxyapatite coating on the femoral stem. And this HAP coating, as I have said, is done from biological perspective, and this is your uncoated femoral stem, which can be either made of stainless steel or titanium material. Now, some of the metallic alloys which are used in biomedical applications, for example 316L stainless steel. Now, stainless steel means it is essentially an alloy of iron and chromium, and here the chromium content is typically more than 10.5%. So, any alloy which is iron chromium and this chromium content is more than 10.5% or more, then you can call it as a stainless steel. That is the standard definition of stainless steel. Now, depending on what is the different alloying elements which are further added to the stainless steel, you can have a austenitic grade stainless steel, which is essentially what 316 stands for. You can have a ferritic stainless steel, or you can have a martensitic stainless steel. But the fundamental definition of stainless steel means this is an alloy of iron and 10.5% minimum amount of chromium that should be there is called 10.5%. Stainless means like if you want to scratch on this material, you won't be able to make a scratch, because this material are extremely resistant to corrosion and wear on this particular stainless steel composition. When you use the standard designation L, L means low carbon content, and this low carbon content may be as low as 0.003% of carbon in this stainless steel. Now, these stainless steel alloys, these are mostly used in a non-load bearing implants such as fracture plates, bone screws, hip nails and stents, and corrosion potential is typically more active than titanium. Therefore, that many of the high durability or longer resistance to corrosion titanium alloys should be used, and their corrosion rates are higher, and this is considered as a biotolerant, and this corrosion rates increase subsequently when subjected to crevice or fretting conditions. These are some of the commercial grades of stainless steel. What you can see here that it has a very high density 7.8, as I had mentioned in yesterday's lecture, that a typical ceramic which has a density of around 3.9 or 4, which is almost like half of that of the mostly steel based alloys. It has elastic modulus, as I said, it is around somewhere around 200 to 210 gigapascal. It has a yield strength quite low, like 240, and but it can go up to 1000 megapascal. Elastic UTS is roughly around 500 megapascal to as high as 1000 megapascal. It has elongation to fracture, it is 40 to 55%. So that means large elongation to fracture is possible in these materials. This is the typical SN curves for chromium vanadium containing stainless steel. What you see here, that these SN curve essentially indicates that what is the typical life of the stainless steel materials when it is subjected to a stress cycle. Stress cycle means, now if it is a tension, now tension it can be sinusoidal stress cycles, like stress will increase then decrease. So this is the stress here. So how many cycles, number of cycles to failure, and this number of cycles can be 10 to the 5, 10 to the power 6, 10 to the power 7. Larger the number of cycles, more better it is preferred in the real life applications. Also, that what is the typical fatigue strength? Typically the fatigue strength denotes like where this SN curve becomes more and more flat. Now this threshold stress value is called the fatigue, or is defined as the fatigue strength. Now what is important to note from this slide is that when you do this fatigue test in air, now this fatigue curve, SN curve is relatively at much higher level or higher region compared to when you do this test, same fatigue test on the same material in seawater. Now seawater means it is a largely NaCl containing solution, and the sodium chloride solution here essentially mimics the typical in vitro environment or typical body environment, and therefore what you can really predict from this, that you cannot really use the fatigue test data of any steel materials which you have obtained in air, but you have to rely on the fatigue test data which you have obtained in the seawater, for example, so that you can conservatively estimate the typical fatigue life of that steel in real in vitro or in vivo condition, because you can see there is a large decrease in the fatigue strength here when you compare the fatigue data in air with that of a fatigue data in the seawater. And then other things is that also this fatigue strength here is around somewhat 60 megapascal. In case of the fatigue test in seawater, it is even less than 20 MPa. So it is 3 times decrease in the fatigue strength of this chromium vanadium containing steel. So this is just an illustration. This kind of behavior is also reflected in other materials. So general nature or general message from this slide is that typically fatigue strength behavior or fatigue behavior in seawater is degraded when you compare the same behavior in simple air or ambient condition. Now, what is the other alloys which are used in the biomaterials applications like cobalt chromium alloy? Now, these cobalt chromium alloys, they can be used for various orthopedic implants application, as I said, for the knee joints, for example. This is used for femoral head prosthesis also in canine THR sets, and it has a good abrasion resistance and low corrosion properties of these materials. Now, these are like some of the commercially available cobalt chromium alloys. As you can see, it is available in the cast form or it can be available in the rod form. In all these cases, it has also a very large density like 7.8 to 9.2. Their elastic modulus is similar like that of steel. They have a UTS of 650, 665 to largely as high as 1000 or 1500 megapascal. It has also hardness in the Vickers scale. It can go up to 450 Vickers hardness numbers. This is a typical microstructure of a cobalt chrome as-cast cobalt chrome moly alloy. As you can see, this is a part of the grain boundary, and here grains are effectively very large. So this is your 50 micron scale, right? And so therefore this is a part of the grain, and so the grain size here can be as high as 200 to 300 micrometer, which is quite large grains. This is hot isostatically pressed cobalt chrome moly alloy. What you can see here, this grain size is also here very large, and it is a very irregular kind of grain boundary. All the grains are equiaxed in nature, and from this 50 micron you can see, when you do this heap or the hot isostatic pressed alloy, then you can essentially reduce the grain size because of the large pressure that you will apply during the compaction process. So this slide actually tells you some of the composition of the cobalt chrome moly alloy, and here it is like F75 grade, which is widely used in the biomedical applications. Here it has a 58 to 69.5% cobalt, and then up to 30% you have chromium, and rest are all other alloying elements. So mostly your cobalt content is roughly around 60% cobalt, and your so this is your cobalt, and around 30% is chromium. Rest is the moly and other elements. So this is like a standard cobalt chrome moly alloy commercial composition. Now coming to the titanium alloys. Now these titanium alloys, they have a very good strength to density ratio, because they are titanium alloys, their density rho titanium is much less than rho of iron or steel. So therefore when you divide the strength by density, you get a higher specific strength values of the titanium. It has a good exceptional corrosion resistance, because the titanium metal the corrosion resistance is much better than that of the steel materials. It has good fatigue strength, much better than that of the steel materials, and it has also high fracture toughness in air or chloride environment. Some of the titanium based alloys are shown which are used in the orthopedic applications. Now as you can see that these titanium alloys, they are also available in different size as well as different shape. You can get titanium balls, you can get titanium femoral stem here. So all these applications are possible because of the combination of properties that they exhibit, as I just mentioned. Now titanium, one of the very well known grades which are widely used, that is titanium 6 aluminum 4 vanadium. So this Ti6Al4V is widely used, as the composition suggests that it has a 6% roughly 6% aluminum and roughly 4% vanadium, and rest is mostly the other alloying elements like carbon and so on, but very small amount, and rest is titanium. And then other one is that commercially pure titanium. So here all the alloying elements in combination is roughly around less than 1%. So this is less than 1%, and it has a 99% purity titanium, so which is called commercially pure titanium. Now these titanium alloys are also available in different form, like alpha beta titanium alloys or beta titanium alloys, and here as this particular slide shows the different kind of properties that are available or different variation of properties. Now, some of the properties I must mention here, like it can have a yield strength of 900 megapascal, and also it has a ultimate tensile strength which is always close to 1000 megapascal or 1 gigapascal. Now, this 1 gigapascal is roughly around double than that of the ultimate tensile strength of steel based material that one can achieve, and therefore titanium has much higher strength property than that of the steel. This particular fact I must emphasize here. Another fact that I should emphasize, the titanium also has a very low density, and their density values is around 4.5 gram per cc, which is much less than that of the steel, which is around 7.8 gram per cc. Other factors is that elastic modulus. So, one is the density of the titanium, one is the good UTS values, and third one is the elastic modulus. Now, elastic modulus of steel, as we have seen earlier, it is somewhere around 210 gigapascal, but elastic modulus of titanium is roughly around 100 or 105 or 110 gigapascal. So, which is almost half of that of the titanium, half of that of the steel based materials. And your cortical bone, this is the elastic modulus of upper bound of the elastic modulus of cortical bone is around 80 gigapascal. So, titanium elastic modulus is close to that of the cortical bone, and therefore, from mechanical point of view also titanium is highly preferred because it somehow closely matches with the upper bound elastic modulus of the cortical bone. Now, this is the kind of fatigue properties of the titanium implants. What I will emphasize here, like when you plot the stress versus cycles to failure here. Now, if you have a high purity titanium which has a extremely low fatigue value. Now, these are like different alloys of titanium with aluminum or with aluminum and vanadium and so on. What you notice here, that with increasing alloying element your fatigue strength is also increases. Now, here this is square tons per square inch, so it is around more than 14 tons per square inch, whereas in case of the high purity titanium it is roughly around 10 tons per square inch. The cycles to failure it remains same, that is around 10 to the power 6, but in case of high purity titanium it is less than 10 to the power 6. So, it is 10 to the power 6 cycles to failure, that is the typical fatigue life of titanium. So, 10 to the power 6 cycles to failure, that is the typical fatigue life of titanium based materials. Now, titanium 6 aluminum 4 vanadium, there is one slide on that because it is mostly commercially well used for biomedical applications, and it is used because it has a very low density, good corrosion properties and good mechanical properties which match closely that with the bone tissue. And its corrosion properties is basically it is a passivating oxide layer that forms on the titanium 6 aluminum 4 vanadium. It is biologically inert, like it is not bioactive in the range of clinically relevant potential ranges. So, inside the human body you have the electrochemical potential, and in this potential region it is titanium 6 aluminum 4 vanadium is biologically inert. These are like typical microstructure of cobalt chrome moly femoral stem. It has a typical cast structure like columnar structure. So, all these columnar grains are oriented at different orientations, and this forms during the casting solidification process. This is some property comparison of some metallic implants, like you start with some commercial grades of stainless steel with cobalt chrome alloys as well as titanium alloys. What you can see, the titanium alloys are their elastic modulus is much below than that of the stainless steel or cobalt chrome moly alloys. It has a good elastic yield strength as well as good tensile strength, and also it has a good fatigue limit. Now, all this combination of properties that makes titanium most attractive material from biomedical point of view. This is the typical microstructure of the cold wart commercial pure titanium. This has somewhat feathery type of microstructure. Also, you have the equiaxed grains. Now, these equiaxed grains, if this is 40 micron, this is roughly 20 to 40 micron is the grain size of this commercially pure titanium. Now, this is the typically titanium 6 aluminum 4 vanadium alpha beta alloys, that is the microstructure. Now, this particular slide actually summarizes the potential uses of bioceramics. Now, bioceramics, mostly that orthopedic applications is the alumina used For coatings for chemical bonding, orthopedic, dental application, maxillofacial prosthetics, that is the hydroxyapatite, bioactive glasses, glass ceramics, they are mostly used, and some of the dental applicants, alumina, hydroxyapatite, bioactive glasses. Now you have this artificial tendon or ligament, that is the PLA carbon composite. So PLA is polylactic acid, that is an example of a one polymer, and carbon fiber composites, these are used in the artificial tendon or ligament. So the specific properties of the ceramics and polymers, like what is the strength properties, how their mechanical properties, they are different from that of the metals, and from that of the metals, that I will discuss more when I'll teach you the bioceramics or bioactive ceramics as well as the different biopolymers. So I think I'll finish my lecture here.